Okay, so this is the fourth video lecture on the chapter of neurobiology, and we left off somewhere around here. And I'd said that we weren't going to talk much about forebrain, midbrain, and look at this, all these slides are about forebrain, midbrain. Some other structures that are worth pointing out some other structures worth pointing out is you have one called the thalamus. The thalamus is what they call a way station. So in other words, a lot of sensory process. That's the one I was just talking about that previous lecture was it's the structure that all these other sensory information comes through, and then it goes, oh, where does this go? It goes to that space for processing. All of it makes sense. Smell. And smell is a really interesting one, sense, because it's considered like the oldest sense. And actually, the olfactory bulb, which is the bulb which processes smell, is right next to is your memory. So if you've ever thought about or heard that smell is like the oldest, the most ancient memory or sense, it's the one that has, it's like if you smell something from like way back, you'll remember that. And some theorize that that's because of the location in the brain that the olfactory structure is. The olfactory bulb is right next to actually the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is where memories are formed. The hippocampus is in the neighborhood, so a system of structures that we call the limbic system, a very important system of brain structures that basically I talk about this one throughout the rest of the semester, that includes the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala is, I always think of it, I had a roommate many years ago who was, I call her the crazy lady. Her name was Amy. And so I think of the amygdala as the crazy lady, because this structure is implicated in fear and anger. Now, the amygdala sometimes gets a bad rap. She kind of gets, uh, because it's fear and anger, like you want to avoid the amygdala, but it's also very important for survival. So the fear and anger structure were necessary if you think about evolutionary and even in contemporary times for our survival, which is also interesting because the amygdala, if you'll notice here on this little list, fear, anger, memory, and learning. So what are the things you probably need to remember the most in terms of survival are probably the things that are dangerous. And memory and learning are essentially the same thing. What is learning? Learning is making memories. And in order for us to survive, we needed to remember the things that were frightening that we should avoid. So hopefully you can keep that one straight. The amygdala, right? A crazy lady, which is implicated in fear, and we learn and remember the things that are the most dangerous. The hippocampus, and I'm pretty sure on one of these slides I actually have an image of the hippocampus. This is where memories are formed. Now, when I was in school way back when, we were being told that all the brain cells you had, that was all the brain cells you were ever going to have, and so you needed to be careful that you didn't kill too many of them. But that is not true. We have since learned that that is not the case. There's a really important phenomena called neurogenesis, and if you take this word apart, genesis meaning new, neuro meaning neuron or neurological, and the hippocampus is responsible for, or it is the birthplace of new brain cells. And there's lots of research being done on things that behaviors, foods, supplements that can promote neurogenesis or new brain cells. But effectively, what we know is the brain can heal. The brain can heal itself. And it kind of makes sense if you think about the hippocampus and is responsible for memory, and you got to have new brain cells to store new memories. You got to have a place in your closet in order to store these new things. Another structure in this neighborhood is the median forebrain bundle. And this is just a cluster I was talking about in a couple of slides back, that these neurons, these brain cells all kind of act together and they form pathways. And in this case, it's a pleasure pathway. It's a group of brain cells that act together, and they have a high density of dopamine. And I'll talk about dopamine too. Dopamine is dope. Dopamine is the neuron or the neurotransmitter that is active or released when we win something. You've probably seen it on Facebook or social media. They talk about the dopamine response. Even social media, the way it's structured, increases your little spikes of dopamine. It's the feeling you get when you win something. If you see you've got more likes than you had yesterday. In some cases, I know for me, there's a certain sound that my phone makes, and it makes me feel good because it's associated with something good or a person that makes me happy, right? And so we get addicted. And there's a lot of talk these days about being addicted to these dopamine fixes. And then when we don't get dopamine, we feel bad. Dopamine is implicated with cocaine. It's implicated with actually like having a crush on somebody. Okay, I'll move on. So cerebral, here's a fancy word. So we've talked about the brain has got these two different sides. All right, you got the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And in fact, the hemispheres communicate. But on the left side, did I talk about the brain, the left side being implicated in language and logic yet? Nope, that's actually, these slides are sometimes in backwards. So the right side of the right hemisphere is associated with like creativity, things like this. The left side, and this is how I always remember it, is implicated with language and logic, right? So the left side of the brain has more structures dedicated to processing language, both spoken and written, and communication. So if somebody has brain damage to the left hemisphere, depending on where in the left hemisphere, this may have, I think I'm doing it the other way around, this may have implications with their ability to communicate. Well, two regions of the left hemisphere have been identified, and one of them is this one. I believe it's called Broca's. Another one is called Wernicke's. Broca's area, when it is damaged, it seems to be implicated in the difficulty in producing speech. They are able to understand speech, and understand what's being said to them, and what they say makes sense. But their ability to actually process language, written or spoken, is very difficult. And so in one of these activities, I ask you to watch a video of a young man named Randy, who is suffering from Broca's aphasia, which is a fancy word for damage. Another structure is Wernicke's, and Wernicke's is a little further towards the back, and this structure is implicated in comprehension. So in this case, a person can produce all kinds of speech. They can write all kinds of letters, they can say all kinds of things, but it makes no sense. What they say is just a rambling of words, or maybe a rambling of letters, or maybe not even letters at all. It's all complete gibberish. So it tells us that communication is very complex, because we have to be able to comprehend, which is what happens back here in the Wernicke, in this part of the brain. And you'll notice this is the temporal lobe, right above the ear. So the parts of the brain that are involved in auditory processing. But we have to be able to comprehend what is being said to us, and we have to be able to produce that speech. The exercise that I ask you to do is you watch a little video on both of these individuals, and then consider if you or someone you loved had brain damage, which would be worse, right? Would it be worse for a person to be suffering from Wernicke's, and then why? This slide here represents, I'll just see how much, okay, this slide here represents what we call the hemispheric specialization. And that is the hemispheric specialization, again, is the left side of the brain is implicated in language and logic. The right side of the brain is implicated in like spatial processing, art often. But when we experience sensory information and like visually, what we see with our right eye actually gets processed in the left hemisphere. I got it reversed, right? And what we see in our left eye actually get processed in the other part of our brain. It's also true, though, that even the way our eyes see, our right eye does not just see the things on the right, and the left eye does not see the things on the left. But our eyes they're sending signals to sort of both sides. So let me see if I can explain this in a way that makes any sense. My mother's partner had brain damage to his left occipital lobe, right? So that means his right peripheral vision was damaged, not his right eye, right? But the right side of both of his eyes was damaged. So one thing, if you've ever been to the doctor and they do this little thing where you can't see what I'm doing, but they have your hand stretched out and then they see how you look forward and how far is it. This is what we call your peripheral vision. So both your right and your left eye are actually seeing things both on your right and your left. But anything that is beyond midline for John, he cannot process because it is, he can't process it on his, again, I forget if it's on his right or his left. I hope that makes some sense. I'm going to stop now. Okay.